I'm Doug Strycharczyk. I'm the CEO of AQR International, but more importantly, I, together with Professor Peter Clough and Professor John Perry, have spent the last 30 years working on building or developing a concept called mental toughness, which probably represents the most important advance in understanding how individuals, how teams, and how organisations work. And that gives us a platform for being able to do something even more effective with them in terms of their development. What we're actually doing is introducing a concept that addresses the most important questions that a practitioner has. So the questions like, why does one person perform better than the other when they are of equal abilities? Why does one person deal with stressful situations better than another, even though to all intents and purposes they should be able to both deal with the same situation equally well? Why are some people better able to deal with the dramatic changes that are happening in our society now? And so on. In other words, we're addressing the questions that begin with why. So, what is mental toughness? Mental toughness is a personality trait that describes our mental responses, our default mental responses when faced by challenge, adversity, opportunity and threat, irrespective of prevailing circumstances. Now that separates it from our broader understanding of personality. Most people, when they're working on personality, are in fact talking about a different aspect of personality, behaviour. So a lot of behavioural measures, for instance, assess what somebody does when events occur. But that's not the most important question, but especially from the perspective of a practitioner. The most important question begins with that word again, why? Why does somebody behave the way they do? And what we now know is that a big part of that explanation is the way you respond mentally to events. And so what we're able to do now is we're able to understand that a little bit better. And the mental toughness concept, which is originally called the 4 C's mental toughness concept, is now known as the 8-factor mental toughness concept, is able to describe an individual's mental responses in terms of 8 independent factors. And those factors are, very briefly, sense of self-worth, which we call life control, emotional regulation, which we call emotional control, goal orientation, which describes our sense of purpose. Do we know why we're doing what we're doing? Secondly, achievement orientation. Are we mentally prepared to put the effort in to achieve what we need to achieve? And then there are things like risk orientation, which describe our approach towards the opportunities that come our way. Not everybody takes every opportunity. There's learning orientation, and that describes the extent to which we reflect. Not everybody reflects when things go wrong, but sometimes they don't reflect when things go well. And then finally, there's self-belief in our abilities, and that is a significant aspect of mental toughness, because we all have abilities, knowledge, skills and experience, but if we don't believe in them, we don't use them. And sometimes we can believe in them, actually think other people have got more, but that's not the case. And so our mental toughness consists of these 8 independent factors. When I talk about independence, that is really significant, because there are more than 40,000 combinations of those 8 factors. In other words, there are 40,000 potential profiles of individuals. That immediately sets it apart from many of the behavioural models that people use, which rely on typing and say, you're one of 4 types, or one of 4 colours, or one of 16 types. What mental toughness is doing is beginning to bring the ability to dig much deeper into an individual and deal with nuance. So, can we develop mental toughness? Well, we can. But the interesting thing about development is it's not always necessary. So what we see is that once we create self-awareness in an individual about their pattern of mental toughness, we are left with a couple of options. Firstly, if it's really important for me to do something about it, I can change my mental toughness profile. But that does require effort. It does require purposeful practice. But it is possible, and for many competent practitioners, it's certainly something that they do and do very well. The other option is, I don't necessarily have to change. Some people will say, well, actually, most of the time, who I am works for me. But I recognise that there are times when my profile doesn't work terribly well. And you're left with two options. Can I learn how to cope with those situations better, or can I avoid those situations? But both solutions can only be provided if you've developed that self-awareness in the individual. So how do we develop that self-awareness? Well, one of the big components, one of the really important components, is the Mental Toughness Questionnaire. Now, there are now well over 1,000 peer-reviewed academic papers that support the mental toughness concept. Some of those research papers have led to the development of the Mental Toughness Questionnaire. Now, technically, it is one of the best personality measures that you can get. It's right up there in the top echelon of personality measures. And in fact, in that top echelon, it is the only one that is looking at mental toughness, or metacognition as it's sometimes called. The concept is applicable everywhere. It's applicable to people in the workplace, it's applicable to people in education. There's a big correlation between academic performance and mental toughness, and well-being in academia. It's applicable in the world of sport. In some ways it had its roots in the world of sport. It's also applicable in the world of well-being and in social mobility, helping people who feel at a disadvantage to somehow begin to aspire. One of the advantages that the concept can bring is it can help with developing a systemic approach. It's very rare that you really can develop an individual in isolation from their environment, from leadership, from the team that they're in. And what we do learn, and what you can learn, is that mental toughness is a fundamentally important concept for individual development, for leadership development, for team development, and for organisational development. We often talk about mental toughness being a merger of resilience and positivity. We don't know of many organisations that don't have both of those as key features of their preferred culture. So mental toughness is a way of bringing together all of those components. So in summary, what we can see is that the mental toughness concept is bringing some new insights into the way we understand the behaviour of individuals, teams and organisations. It helps us to see people in a unique way. It helps us to see people as genuinely independent individuals, so we're not treating them as through a one-size-fits-all approach. It also helps us to understand better how we can help each person to optimize. We can sometimes be fixated on we must develop people, in other words, we must change people, but sometimes to get the best out of people, we simply need to show them how to be the best version of themselves that they can be. And that's the core message of the mental toughness concept. Thank you.